Imagine archaeologists in Jerusalem open a sealed chamber under the Temple Mount and find a golden chest covered in ancient dust. Within hours, politicians are on planes, religious leaders call emergency meetings, and the whole world is asking the same question. Have we just found the Ark of the Covenant? In the Hebrew Bible, the Ark of the Covenant is a gold-covered chest that held the original tablets of the Ten Commandments and was treated as a sacred object with terrifying power. The stories say the Israelites carried it into battle and saw whole armies fall and city walls collapse when it went ahead of them. If the Ark suddenly reappeared today, it would be the biggest archaeological discovery in religious history, and it would change how millions of people think about God, the Bible, and even the politics of Jerusalem. So, is the Ark really lost? Many people think it was destroyed when the Babylonians tore Jerusalem apart in 587 BC. Yet scattered through history are clues that it might have survived. Some point to a sealed cave somewhere in the Judean desert. Others insist it never left Jerusalem at all and lies in a chamber under the Temple Mount. Another ancient tradition swears it was carried to Ethiopia and locked inside a chapel that nobody is allowed to enter. We will take all the wild claims about the Ark, strip them down to the three most serious options, and test them one by one against history, archaeology, and scripture. And by the end of this video, you will be able to decide for yourself whether the Ark of the Covenant is truly lost, or whether it might still be out there, hidden in plain sight. If we go back to its beginning, we do not actually know its exact historical origin, but the Bible gives a clear version of its story in the book of Exodus. After leaving slavery in Egypt, Moses and the Israelites set up camp at the base of Mount Sinai. The account says the mountain shook, smoke rose up from the top, and the voice of God called Moses to come up. Moses climbed the mountain and stayed there for 40 days and 40 nights, and when he finally came back down, he was carrying 2 stone tablets. On those tablets were written the 10 Commandments, and those 10 laws formed part of a covenant, a binding agreement in which God chose Israel as his people on the condition that they kept his commands. Not long after this, God instructed Moses to have a chest built to hold those tablets safely, and the instructions were very detailed. The chest was to be made from acacia wood, with set dimensions of 2.5 cubits in length, and 1.5 cubits in both width and height, and it was to be covered in pure gold on the inside and the outside, with a decorative gold edging around it. Rings made of gold were to be fixed to its sides so that long poles could be pushed through them, allowing the priest to carry it without touching the chest itself. Inside that ark, the tablets with the 10 Commandments were placed, and in other parts of the Bible we are told that a jar of manna, the strange food that had appeared on the ground during the desert journey, was also set inside, along with a wooden staff that had belonged to Aaron, the brother of Moses. The top of the chest was not left plain. It had a special lid of gold with 2 cherubim facing each other, and that lid was called the mercy seat and treated as the holiest part of the whole object, because God was said to appear there, as if seated above it when meeting with Moses and Aaron. The ark was kept inside a large tent, the tabernacle, and only Moses and Aaron were allowed into the most inner part of that tent where the ark stood, and there they were said to speak with God directly. When you put all of that together, the ark would have looked very impressive, and stood as a visible sign of God's presence among the people and of the covenant made at Sinai, since it held those key objects from that story. Because the biblical text gives such specific sizes and features, many biblical scholars and archaeologists think it probably describes a real piece of religious furniture, and it is easy to picture a careful scribe measuring the object and then recording those numbers. The idea of building rich ceremonial chests was not unique either, since cultures across the ancient Near East created similar items, and the ark is often compared to the Egyptian procession barks that carried statues of gods through cities or along the Nile. When the tomb of Tutankhamun was opened in 1922, the archaeologist Howard Carter noticed a chest-shaped object, and at first wondered if it could be the lost ark itself. But further study showed it was a gilded box made for the young pharaoh's burial. and although it looked very similar to the biblical description, this funerary chest had the god Anubis on top, positioned there to lead King Tut into the afterlife. If we step outside Egypt for a moment, we find objects that look very similar to the Ark of the Covenant in nearby cultures. A 9th century Phoenician coffin made for King Ahram shows the storm god El seated on a throne with 2 winged figures on either side, and that setup looks a lot like the mercy seat where the Hebrew god is described as appearing. In that same region, this god El is also linked by name to the God of Israel, who is called El and more often Elohim in Hebrew. Those kinds of links with the cultures around Israel are used to argue that an ark like this really did exist in some form, even if the miracle stories around it are more open to question. In the biblical stories, the ark does not just sit still. When the people moved, priests carried it and it went out in front of the camp, about a kilometre ahead, and a pillar of smoke showed them where to go during their 40 years in the wilderness. When Joshua took over from Moses, and the people reached the edge of the land they had been promised, the ark went into the Jordan River first, and the waters parted so they could cross safely, echoing what Moses had experienced earlier at the Red Sea. But carrying the ark came with strict rules. 2 of Moses' nephews, in the book of Leviticus, tried to make an offering inside the tabernacle that they were not authorized to make, and they were burned to death for it. In another story, the ark was on its way to Jerusalem on a cart when the oxen pulling it stumbled, the chest shook, and the man guiding the cart reached out to steady it with his hand. He died on the spot. There is also the incident at the town of Beth Shemesh, where the people looked inside the ark out of curiosity, and the account says fire swept through and many died, with one manuscript giving a total of 50,070 deaths. Once people saw this kind of power, they began to bring the ark into battles. The most famous example is the siege of Jericho in the book of Joshua. The ark was carried around the city walls while horns were blown once each day, and then on the 7th day the horns sounded and the people shouted together. The walls collapsed, and the Israelite army went in and killed every inhabitant according to the command they had been given. The ark was used in several conflicts in this way, almost like a weapon brought to the front lines, but it did not guarantee a win every time. On one occasion the Israelites lost, and the Philistines captured the ark, took it to their city Ashdod, and set it in front of a statue of their god Dagon. The result, according to the story, was that the statue was ruined, and a terrible plague, likened to bubonic plague, broke out among the people there. Frightened by what was happening, the Philistines hurried to send the ark back, and the Israelites agreed to receive it. These accounts have clearly fed into modern storytelling. You can see the connection in the 1981 film Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Nazis are trying to get hold of the ark in order to use it as a weapon because of its destructive power. In the final scene, they do manage to open it, and in a famous sequence with melting wax effects they are all killed, which fits the kind of disasters the Bible associates with mishandling the ark. Later on in the biblical story, once the Israelites were established in the land, the ark no longer travelled from place to place, but was given a fixed location. After King Solomon finished building the temple, the ark was put inside its inner room, called the Holy of Holies. Only once each year, on the Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur, was the high priest allowed to go into that inner space. He was to place the sins of the people onto 2 goats, sacrifice them, and then sprinkle their blood on the mercy seat, and the word scapegoat comes from this ritual. The last time the ark is mentioned in scripture is not when it is stolen or destroyed, but when its keepers were ordered to bring it back to Jerusalem after it had been away from the temple for a time. That took place at Passover in the 18th year of King Josiah, around the spring of 621 BC, and after that reference there are no more reports of anyone seeing it, so it simply drops out of the biblical story. That last clear mention of the ark in Josiah's time comes only a few decades before disaster hits Jerusalem. Around 35 years later, in 587 BC, the Neo-Babylonian forces under King Nebuchadnezzar II surrounded the city, broke in, and burned it. The temple was stripped and then destroyed. Many people died, and those who survived were taken away to Babylon and not allowed to come back. They lived there under harsh conditions, often in slavery for about 70 years, a time remembered as the exile. When that exile ended and the Jews were finally allowed to return, they rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. In the records from that Second Temple period, there is no sign that the ark was put back inside it. Much later, when that rebuilt temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, the ark is still not listed. The Jewish writer Flavius Josephus gives a list of the objects the Romans carried off and mentions a heavy golden table, a golden lampstand, and then the law of the Jews, but he does not name the ark itself. Some people try to link that phrase, the law of the Jews, to the ark, but this is doubtful, because in the Roman Forum there is a triumphal arch that shows the Roman troops carrying out temple treasures, including the golden lampstand, and the ark is not shown there either. For something that important, it is strange to see no picture and no direct line in Josephus. So again and again, when people try to track it, they end up back at the Babylonian attack of 587 BC as the moment when the ark drops out of sight, and the assumption is that its disappearance in scripture is tied in some way to that invasion and the fall of the temple. Jewish writings collected in the Talmud speak of the ark as having been destroyed at that time, either burned and crushed in the ruins of the temple, or hauled off to Babylon and lost there. That might have happened, but the text never actually says in plain words that the ark was destroyed on that day. Because there is no firm statement, other options stay open. The ark might have been hidden away before the Babylonians arrived, or it might not have been inside the temple then at all. On that basis, people still allow for the idea that the ark could still exist and might be found. With such a famous object, it is not surprising that many locations have been suggested. Some are more convincing than others, so here we will stick to 3 that are presented as the strongest. The first group of ideas puts the ark somewhere in the Judean desert. Early Jewish sources link it to a safe hiding place there, and one key text is the second book of Maccabees. This writing does not appear in every Bible and is classed as apocryphal. In the centuries after the exile, several such works were produced, like Jubilees and Enoch, and because they did not have the long use that books such as Genesis and Exodus had, people never fully agreed on their place in the canon. Second Maccabees belongs to that group, and is usually dated between 150 and 120 BC. In that book we are told that, just before the Babylonian army came, the prophet Jeremiah knew the ark was in danger and chose to hide it out in the wild. The account says he took it to the mountain where Moses had gone up and had seen the inheritance of God, which many have connected with Mount Nebo in Jordan, where Moses looked over the promised land in Deuteronomy, though that link is not certain. Jeremiah is said to have put the ark and other temple items in a cave at the foot of that mountain and then sealed the entrance. Some of the men with him wanted to mark the spot so it could be found again later, but Jeremiah refused and said that the place would stay unknown until God gathered his people again and showed them mercy. That saying has not stopped people from trying to locate the cave. Treasure hunters have carried out illegal digs around Mount Nebo in search of the ark, and the Jordanian authorities have had to keep watch and punish this activity. Official digs with permission have revealed various finds near the mountain, but not a hidden chamber with the ark inside. Because of that, some researchers have turned their attention to other mountains named in the Bible, in case the ark was taken there instead, and Mount Sinai often comes up as a main candidate, since that is where Moses received the 10 Commandments. The difficulty is that the true location of Mount Sinai is not agreed. Many point to a peak called Jebel Musa in Egypt, a view that goes back to the 6th century AD when Christians built a monastery at its base, but there are also arguments that the real Mount Sinai may lie somewhere else. When people try to place the biblical Mount Sinai on a modern map, they do not agree on a single spot. Different proposals stretch across a big zone that covers parts of Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan. Any one of those sites could hide a cave large enough to hold the Ark of the Covenant, if such a cave still exists and has not already been opened. One writer goes much further and argues that the Ark was actually found long ago, during the time of the Crusades, by the Knights Templar. In that version, the Templars were based near the ruins of Petra in Jordan, and heard that the Ark might be hidden somewhere close by. They began to search the region, and eventually reached a mountain called Jebel al-Madba. At the foot of that mountain, they supposedly came across an unmarked cave. They went in with torches, saw gold and ancient objects that looked untouched for a very long time, and at the back of the cave they identified one chest as the Ark of the Covenant. From there, the story says, they took the hoard back to Europe, but kept the Ark itself secret. Later guesses place it in Chartres Cathedral, in Hauthouse, France, or on the estate of the English nobleman Ralph de Sadley, or even say it went first to Ireland and then to the early American colonies. These tales are striking, but they rest on weak evidence and doubtful sources, so they are normally treated as speculative and pushed to the edge of serious discussion. If we move away from that and go back to the idea of the Ark being hidden somewhere in the Judean desert, one strong point in favour of that region is that real discoveries keep coming out of its caves. In 1946, 2 Bedouin herders were looking after goats near old ruins by the Dead Sea when they noticed small openings high in the rock. They climbed up, went inside, and found little clay jars. When they broke the jars open, they uncovered thin scrolls and fragments of manuscripts. The dry heat had kept them in good condition, and the ancient Hebrew writing could still be read. Without realizing it, they had stumbled onto what is now seen as the most important find in biblical studies so far. These texts are now thought to have been left by a Jewish group called the Essenes, who hid them before the Romans attacked their settlement, which lines up closely with the story in 2 Maccabees about Jeremiah hiding the Ark before the Babylonian invasion. Just as those Dead Sea caves stayed untouched for centuries, it is possible that other caves in the desert have yet to be explored, and if the old stories are right, one of them could still contain the Ark of the Covenant. There is also the possibility that the Ark was never concealed in the desert at all, but was taken south to Africa. For many generations, a Christian community in Axum, in Ethiopia, has said that they hold the Ark. They say it is kept inside a small chapel, and outsiders are not allowed to see it. The route by which the Ark is supposed to have reached Ethiopia is told in the Kebra Nagast, a national religious book. One episode in that work tells how King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba had a son named Menelik. Although he grew up in Jerusalem, the story says that when he became an adult, he had to return to his mother's country, Ethiopia. Before he left, some of the priests attached to Menelik are said to have gone into the temple, removed Solomon's most treasured object, the Ark, and swapped it for a perfect copy that looked the same. On the journey home, Menelik realized that the real Ark was with him, and was struck by the fact that its feared power had not harmed anyone, not even the men who had taken it. He took that as a sign from God, and carried the Ark onto Ethiopia, where he placed it in the holy city of Axum. According to the tradition, it has stayed there for about 3,000 years in a chapel that belongs to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion. It is said to be watched over by a continuous succession of monks who are not allowed to leave the grounds, and no one from outside is allowed to go in. Even so, some people claim they have been allowed inside and have seen what is kept there. One of those is Edward Ullendorf, a British historian and professor of Ethiopian studies. In an interview, he said that he was quietly shown the object in 1941 while he was in the area during the Second World War. He said that, in his view, it was not the biblical Ark at all, but an empty wooden chest made in the later Middle Ages, put together as needed. After his comments, many scholars have remained doubtful that the real Ark is in Ethiopia, and see the Menelik account as a way of building a national legend and supporting the claims of Ethiopian rulers. Many Ethiopian Christians strongly reject that view, and insist that the genuine Ark is still in their care. In practical terms, the only way to settle the matter would be for the Ark in Axum to be shown publicly, and so remove the suspicion that it is a forgery. In 2009, Patriarch Abune Paulos told foreign reporters that he was going to reveal it, but the following day he withdrew that statement. As things stand, the Ark of the Covenant is still said to be kept inside that Ethiopian chapel, and until it is either displayed freely to the world or seized by force, as some have lately worried, this particular line of investigation remains open but unanswered. For this last possibility, we go back to the Holy Land, to Jerusalem, the city where our search started. In this version of the story, the Ark of the Covenant is not in a distant land at all, but hidden directly under the old temple site, on the area now called the Temple Mount. Today that hilltop is already crowded with important religious buildings, and that is the main reason no proper dig has taken place there. The best known of these is the Dome of the Rock, an Islamic shrine first completed in 962 AD, which stands over the rock from which the Prophet Muhammad is believed to have ascended to heaven. On the same platform is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and the whole complex is built over the spot where Solomon's temple is said to have stood. At the base of the mount is the Western Wall, the remaining piece of the Second Temple, destroyed by the Romans and treated as the holiest site in Judaism. Any attempt to tunnel under these structures would be highly sensitive, because the work could damage or even bring down buildings that are sacred to several faiths. Despite that, some have still tried to search under the mount. On 28 July 1981, arguments broke out near the Western Wall after it emerged that someone had been digging there without official permission. That person was Rabbi Yehuda Getz, who was looking for the Ark. Even though he had been warned not to, he arranged a hidden excavation under the Temple Mount at night. During the dig, a small opening was found that led into a large tunnel, about 28 metres long and 6 metres wide. The team believed this tunnel linked up with several chambers deeper under the mount, and when they saw a small archway at the end, Getz became convinced that the Ark was just beyond it. Before they could push further, word of the dig reached an Israeli radio station. Crowds from different communities quickly gathered above ground. There were clashes, and the authorities stepped in, shut the project down, and banned more digging. Since that time, whatever spaces lie under the Temple Mount have stayed closed, and because the political situation in Jerusalem is still very strained, organised excavation there is not allowed. For now, anything that might be under that platform remains inaccessible. Long before Getz, Jewish writers had already spoken of hidden spaces beneath Jerusalem. Around 1,000 years earlier than Maimonides, the historian Flavius Josephus mentioned royal caves under the city that people used as escape routes from the Romans, and that word royal suggests some of them may go back to the time of Israel's kings. In the 12th century AD, the rabbi and philosopher Maimonides gave a more detailed story and said he knew where the Ark was. According to his account, when Solomon was building the first temple, God warned him that it and its treasures would one day be destroyed. To guard against that, Solomon is said to have had a system of underground chambers made, like a maze, to hold the Ark out of harm's way. The same tradition says that King Josiah, during whose reign the Ark is last mentioned in the Bible, used those rooms to hide the Ark shortly before the Babylonians arrived. If that happened and the Ark was left there, it would have remained safe when the temple fell, and if nobody ever went back for it, it could still be in those vaults now. Modern archaeology has confirmed that Jerusalem does sit over a complex of underground spaces. In 1854, a disused stone quarry was found under part of the old city's Muslim quarter. It is now called Zedekiah's Cave, covers about 5 acres, and is the largest known cave system beneath the city. Since then, many underground passages have been mapped under Jerusalem. Some of them, including the Siloam Tunnel, are dated to around the 9th or 8th century BC, which is the same general period assigned to Solomon's reign. Even so, one area has not been properly examined, and that is directly under the Temple Mount, for the reasons we just heard. Because digging is blocked, researchers have turned to methods that do not disturb the ground. One of these is ground-penetrating radar, often shortened to GPR. It sends high-frequency radio waves into the Earth and uses the reflections to build up a fuzzy picture of what lies below. The advantage is that nobody has to break the surface, so nothing is physically touched. The problem is that the images can be distorted very easily by electrical activity or by certain kinds of rock, and a city as old and built up as Jerusalem has plenty of both. While normal excavations are off the table, however, this sort of scanning is presented as one of the few possible tools that could, in theory, reveal the Ark's hiding place if it is still there. By this stage, we have circled around the same three possibilities you heard at the beginning: the desert cave, the Ethiopian chapel, or the hidden chamber under Jerusalem. Each proposal has points in its favour and obvious weaknesses, but they all share one serious issue. Every one of these stories rests on texts written long after the Ark vanished from the biblical story. 2nd Maccabees, the apocryphal book that talks about Jeremiah hiding the Ark, was put together roughly 500 years after the Ark's last appearance. The Ethiopian book, the Kebra Nagast, which gives the Menelik story, was probably written in the 14th century AD. Maimonides, who passed on the account of Solomon's secret vaults under Jerusalem, lived in the 12th century AD. None of these writers saw the Ark themselves, and we are not told where their information came from. What we have are reports based on rumours that had been circulating for hundreds or even thousands of years. When the evidence is this thin, careful research very quickly has to rely on guesswork. On top of that, when we read the Bible itself as a source, we have to remember that, although some passages match known events, its accounts are often shaped by story and were written long after the events they describe were supposed to have happened. Because our written sources are late and shaped like stories, it is hard to draw a clear line between fact and legend. So instead of chasing rumours, we have to anchor ourselves to the few fixed points we do have, and one of them is this. After the temple was destroyed in 587 BC, the Bible never mentions the Ark again. Many people have taken that silence to mean the Ark was destroyed at that time. Earlier, I pushed back against relying only on that guess, but if we are honest, it is possible that the Ark really did vanish from history in that moment. When the Babylonians broke Jerusalem and tore down the temple, the Israelites did not only lose a building, the objects that showed God's presence and the covenant were gone as well, and for them that meant God's visible presence on earth had been removed. That kind of loss would have been very hard to accept, and some people did turn away from the beliefs of their fathers. In that same period of sorrow, their religion also began to shift. Across the ancient Near East, people normally tied their gods to things they could see, like statues, temples or arks. When those things disappeared, faith started to rest less on objects and more on something you could not see. For the Israelites, God was no longer someone they had to see in order to worship. He was someone they trusted in without physical proof. During that time, their key writings were gathered and set down, and their shared stories were fixed in what became their sacred texts. It is in this era that many scholars place the end of the old Israelite temple religion and the beginning of what we now call Judaism. That change in the way they worshipped fits with the idea that the Ark and other physical symbols of the covenant were gone, and that their religious life had to adjust without them. If that is the case, then people who claim to know where the Ark is might be holding on to something that has already been lost, keeping their hope alive instead of letting go. On the other hand, they might truly have information that is not written down. Whether it lies forgotten in a desert cave, guarded in a distant chapel, or sealed beneath the stones of Jerusalem, the search for the Ark is really a search for something deeper. People are not only hunting for wood and gold, they are reaching for a sign that God can be pinned to one place, held up to the camera, proved. If the Ark were ever uncovered, it would be the most dramatic archaeological discovery in religious history, and the shockwaves would run through churches, synagogues, and governments alike. Yet the stories that surround it all whisper a warning that the presence of God is holy, that it does not always submit to our curiosity, and that some doors, once opened, cannot easily be closed again. If something in this story stirred your heart, if it made you see hidden faith or quiet obedience in a new light, don't keep it to yourself. Share this video with someone who needs that reminder today. You never know how far a small truth can travel. Tell me in the comments what part spoke to you most, and if you haven't subscribed yet, take a second to do that now and turn on the bell, so you won't miss what's coming next. Each video is another step deeper into the mysteries of Scripture and the ways God still speaks through silence. Thank you for walking this journey with me. May God bless you richly, and may your faith always be remembered in His presence. I'll see you soon.